The 2021 Belgian Grand Prix has become the first race in F1's history where there's no racing. Previously, there's been wet races abandoned, such as the 14-lap 1991 Australian Grand Prix, or races where tragic crashes have curtailed the race, such as the 29-lap 1975 Spanish Grand Prix. But for the first time, F1 was left in a tricky situation, as they attempted to have a race at a track with hard and continuous rain throughout the afternoon, freezing windy conditions, and zero visibility as mist descended on the circuit, which is completely surrounded by forest. In the end, after the longest delay ever, cars did the bare minimum of laps under the safety car in order to secure half points before sunset hit. The result, which saw 8 different teams in the top 8 for the first time ever, was seen as a joke by fans, drivers and commentators alike, and many were split on whether points should have been awarded at all on one of F1's most farcical days. So should they? First of all, what actually happened during all this mayhem? Well, the race was supposed to get underway at 3 PM local time, but a series of delays forced the race to start 25 minutes later. The drivers then completed 2 formation laps behind the safety car. After multiple complaints about the poor slippery conditions and the lack of visibility, the race was red flagged and stopped. Now this is where the confusion starts. Normally, of course, there is one formation lap followed by the race start, unless a car has a problem during that lap, for example, and then sometimes there's a second formation lap. However, instead of getting the race underway after the second formation lap, the cars piled into the pits and the race didn't start. The question was, had the race already started? Do the formation laps count as part of the race, even if they aren't strictly referred to as that? The drivers had already begun one of their required 44 laps, even if it was behind the safety car, so surely it had begun. The reason why the discussion about whether the race had started was so important was because of Article 38.10 in the sporting regulations. It states, should the race be suspended, the length of the suspension will be added to this period, up to a maximum total race time of 3 hours. Now from what I gather, if the race had started, then there would be no more action allowed by 3 hours after that starting time. In short, for a full F1 race to happen, there would need to be 2 hours of racing done within 3 hours of the second formation lap. The only problem was that there was going to be rain flat out for the next 3 hours. But race control decided that the race hadn't started, so there was no need to panic, until Red Bull quickly sent them a message. Before all this madness, Perez had crashed his car on the laps getting to the starting grid. Now normally he'd be out, as cars starting the race must have their wheels fitted 5 minutes before the start. But since the race had not started, Red Bull told the FIA that it was fine for Perez to start. The FIA said no, but then had to reluctantly agree because they had said the race hadn't started, as otherwise the 3-hour rule would ruin any chance of a race. I have no idea why F1 added that rule to the rulebook, by the way. The only problem was the race counter was now 43 instead of 44, as everyone else had completed 2 formation laps. But Perez hadn't, so now he had extra fuel compared to everyone else, unless they decided Perez was 1 or 2 laps down on everyone else. But how can that be when the race hadn't started? Look, maybe you're getting confused, but hopefully if you rewind the video and take it all in again, maybe you can understand why the FIA stewards confused themselves and then basically left themselves in a bad place. So what they did is at 6:17 local time, they said, we're going to have a 1-hour race to settle the winner for the Belgian Grand Prix before it gets too dark for a race to take place. However, this hour looked randomly made up, and they started receiving criticism. So the official line was, the race did actually start at 3 PM as it should from the sporting regulations, but then the timer stopped at 5 PM for rain, so we have 1 hour left. I don't understand the point of the 3-hour rule if you can just freeze it whenever you want and therefore make the gap between racing longer than 3 hours. And many, who had read the sporting regulations lots of times, pointed out that you can't just temporarily stop a race. Despite this, the stewards dug out the 80-page International Sporting Code and rightly noted that 11.9.3.0 says the stewards may take the decision to stop temporarily or permanently all or part of a competition, noting that the decision is taken on the grounds of force majeure. But whatever, we were going to get a race anyhow. Until the cars poured back into the pits on the 4th lap and the race was stopped. Despite there not even being a lap of racing, the stewards decided that points were going to be awarded though, with Verstappen effectively picking up 12.5 points for being fastest in qualifying. Drivers were of course divided on whether points should be awarded, with, surprise surprise, drivers having a good day wanting points given out, and drivers having a bad day not wanting that to happen. So I thought I'd try and give a balanced opinion on whether F1 was fair to award these points. But just before I do that, if you found the video informative so far, I'd be massively thankful if you could subscribe to the channel. Currently only 4 of every 1,000 viewers bothered to click that red subscribe button, and every subscriber means an awful lot to me, especially being a relatively small channel. So if you are liking the video so far and are nice enough to subscribe to the channel, I'd be greatly appreciative. So there are arguments both for and against whether points should have been awarded. Starting with the former. Well, why shouldn't points have been awarded? You might not agree with it, but Article 6.5 of the sporting regulation states, half points will be awarded if the leader has completed more than 2 laps, but less than 75% of the original race distance. I'd argue that the 2 laps should be changed to something like 25%, but this rule has been in the sport for a long time now, and 2 laps were completed. Some will say that the cars shouldn't have bothered to do any laps unless everyone was certain there was a chance of racing happening, meaning points would be given out. But fans were promised an event where points were given out, and they ended up with definitely a memorable day, and one as well where the home hero Verstappen cut the gap at the top from 8 to 3 points. F1 said they tried to do all they could to complete the race, but due to the weather and inevitably with the recent crashes at Spa in mind, including Lando's in the wet qualifying the previous day, they were reluctant to get the race to full distance, having to settle for half points. Some read through the sporting code during the race and pointed out that 11.9.3.L states that the stewards may postpone a competition in the event of force majeure or for serious safety reasons. As the stewards stopped the clock due to force majeure, some pointed out that there was an option to delay the race to Monday, the following day, with it being a bank holiday as well in lots of countries around the world. But it was not a bank holiday in Belgium, and Dominicali confirmed that it would have been impossible to run the race on Monday, not least due to the availability of marshals, although he did note that it was considered. F1 was left in an unprecedented circumstance, with the sport having some sort of racing action at every previous venue they'd turned up at. You could argue that the stewards did the best thing by waiting as long as they could, trying as hard as they could, but eventually having to take as much from the race as possible, all in accordance with the rulebook by issuing half points. But others, including prominent F1 drivers, slammed the FIA for awarding any points. As soon as Hamilton got out of the car to do his post-race interview, he pointed out that it wasn't any better when they sent us back out, and added that, "I hope the fans get their money back today." Asked how he felt about half points being awarded a bit later on, Hamilton replied, "Money talks," and it was literally the 2 laps to start the race. It's all money scenario, so everyone gets their money, and I think the fans should get theirs back too, because unfortunately they didn't get to see what they came and paid for. He carried on by saying there would be discussions with those in charge of F1, and added that, "I think the sport made a bad choice today." In reality, fans wouldn't even be promised refunds if the cars didn't move at all. Spa-GP's policy on refunds is, in accordance with the applicable Belgian law, no penalty or compensation of any kind can be claimed from Spa-GP in case of cancellation of the event due to force majeure. But of course, giving half points could be shown as a reason to lessen the anger over refunds. Other prominent figures also disagreed with the awarding of points. Norris said no points should be awarded. Vettel branded the action as a joke, and Fernando Alonso said that many got Christmas presents early by getting points. Many argue that it felt unfair to award 12.5 points for effectively setting a good qualifying lap, and made the point that doing 3 laps behind the safety car now gave as many points as a flat-out 74% race. A large amount of people said the race should have just been abandoned with no points given out, with many agreeing with the likes of Hamilton, saying that the ability to give points was the only reason they sent us out. Masi disagreed with the remarks, and said that the late race restart was a genuine attempt to achieve green flag racing. There were also some initial suggestions that the race only lasted for 1 lap, and so after all this, points shouldn't have been awarded as 2 laps weren't properly completed. Article 51.14 states, if the race cannot be resumed, the results will be taken at the end of the penultimate lap before the lap during which the signal to suspend the race was given. This basically means with the red flag coming out on lap 3, then the results are taken from the end of lap 1, but points only can be awarded for over 2 laps of racing. F1 Race Director Michael Masi had to clear things up afterwards by saying that the rules related to red flags and those regarding awarding points are not connected. Masi said there's been 3 laps completed, noting that the 3rd lap was completed as the cars crossed the control line in the fast lane. He then said the classification for points is taken on the penultimate lap before the lap the signal was given, so there's effectively 2 separate things. One is what's done to complete the race. One is what happens on the basis of championship points. So amongst all the confusion, what do I think about whether F1 should have awarded points or not? Well, I think the stewards did the right thing in the regards that they were consistent with the rulebook. They tried to start the race, and when they couldn't due to weather, they awarded half points. But surely driving behind the safety car for a few laps doesn't deserve points. I personally think that no points should have been awarded, and that there needs to be a look and some modifications to the rulebook. It's like they never thought continuous rain was ever going to be a problem, and throughout the whole race, commentators, teams, stewards and fans didn't know what was going on. Maybe one change that could happen is upping the 2 lap required distance to 25%. Either way, I think we all agree that it was a bit of a mess and that there needs to be some better wet weather protocols. But if the day gave us anything, it was a historical and unprecedented day in the sport's history, and one that'll be looked back on for years to come. Before you go anywhere, I really want to hear your opinions on whether points should have been awarded or not in the comments section. And if you are going anywhere, maybe the videos on screen right now will interest you. Please make sure you check your subscribed if you did enjoy the video. But thanks for watching, and goodbye.